adds value to the supply chain. So this is the role of value in a supply chain. Now, let me talk about the systems approach. Okay, so we look at a supply chain, we look at a company. Okay, these are the backgrounds. This is the context for purchasing, and these are systems. A supply chain is a system, and a company is a system. Okay, and what makes a company a system? If you look at the definition of a system, it says a collection of entities, a collection of parts and components that work together to achieve a common goal. Okay, so we said, for example, when we were talking about logistics, we said the goal is to meet customer requirements. Okay, so multiple entities will come together to achieve that goal. Okay, and similarly, in a company that wants to meet customer requirements, different departments will work together. Okay, so each department will be a separate part of the system, and the entire company is a system. Okay, so the thing is, in a system, uh, these components interact with each other. In a company, these departments interact with each other. They're not independent. Okay, so what that means is that if we want to reduce the costs, we need to look at the total cost. If we look at the costs incurred by individual departments, that will be misleading. Okay, we want to optimize the entire system. We want to minimize the total cost in a company. Okay, if we focus on a single department and if we want to reduce the cost incurred by that single department, then that may be suboptimal for the entire system. Now, as we're talking about purchasing, and obviously companies want to reduce their purchasing costs, but when you try to minimize the purchasing cost, you should not um, do it just for purchasing. You need to consider the entire company and you need to look at the total cost. Now, to expand this a bit further, let me show you this diagram. Okay. So here are the 4 P's of marketing. Okay, product, promotion, price, and place. Right, and these are the related logistics costs. So obviously, transportation, shipping products costs has a cost. Warehousing, obviously, storing products has a cost. Order processing and information processing has its cost. Lot quantity costs, inventory carrying costs. Okay. Now this diagram hides purchasing costs under the lot quantity costs. So the uh, purchasing costs are are here. Okay. Why do they call purchasing costs lot quantity costs? Because the cost depends on how big your purchasing lot is. Okay. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. But you can see that these costs affect each other. Okay. So, for example, if I want to reduce my transportation costs, okay, uh, I may want to ship products in larger quantities. Okay, instead of making many small shipments, maybe I decide to make one large shipment, and that will reduce my transportation cost. But what's going to happen to my inventory costs? Now I will have a lot of inventory because I just received one huge bulk shipment. Okay, so when this cost goes up, another cost goes. When this cost goes down, another cost can go up. So ultimately, what matters is the total cost. So uh, in purchasing as well as in other issues, when we make a decision, okay, we need to take a systems view and we need to think about the total cost. Okay, so when we make purchasing decisions, we need to make sure that our decisions uh, reduce the total cost, not just the purchasing cost itself. Okay, because purchasing is not independent of the other departments in a company, and all these departments interact, and this is the background, this is the context in which we make purchasing decisions. Okay, and ultimately, here's a quote, says logistics management is about management of cost trade-offs. And the exact same thing is true for purchasing. Okay, over the course of this class, we're going to talk about many trade-offs in purchasing. Okay, and as a purchasing manager, your goal will be to uh, balance these trade-offs to the best of your ability. Um, Now we have talked about the supply chain, and we said that every member of a supply chain adds value, but we haven't quite defined what that value is. Now here's a definition of the value chain and how firms add value in a supply chain. I took this definition because it's extremely well known, and it's by Michael Porter, who is a Harvard professor as well as a uh, management guru. Okay, so it says this concept of value chain divides a company into activities, into technologically and economically distinct activities it performs to do business. We call these value activities. A company creates a value a company creates is measured by the amount that buyers are willing to pay for a product or service. So what is value? The value is what customers agree to pay. I mean, customers are not forced to pay for a product or service. They have choice in a free market economy. And if customers choose to pay for a product, if they are willing to spend a certain amount of money on a product or a service, it means the customers perceive value in this product or service. If they didn't perceive any value, why would they pay for it? Like, why would you pay for something which doesn't give you any value at all? Okay, so the idea is if a customer is willing to pay for something, then there must be value in that product or service, because otherwise the customer wouldn't pay. So what are these activities? So here is inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics. So inbound means raw material coming in. Outbound means finished products are going. So marketing and sales, service, and here the customer pays. Okay, this is your profit margin. Okay, so there's a sequence here. Okay, and then there are support activities. Okay, firm infrastructure is one of them. Physical plants, facilities, manufacturing plants, distribution centers, etc. Human resources, talent, technology, and procurement. As you can see, purchasing and procurement, as we will talk shortly, covers the entire range of all value-added activities. Okay. So as you will see later in this presentation, purchasing is so fundamental in a firm because it supports every activity in the value chain of a firm, within a firm. Okay? So we've talked about value and how so this is how purchasing helps companies add value. Purchasing is critical to adding value because of this. Now let's talk about purchasing and competitive advantage. Okay. Um, can firms use purchasing to achieve competitive advantage? Can firms use purchasing to beat their competitors? Okay. First of all, what is the competition about? Okay. What do companies what do companies compete for? And what does it mean to beat the competition? What do you think? What do companies compete for? Companies compete for customers, which is market share, and they compete for revenue and profits. Okay. So what does that mean? Companies want to have more and more and more customers. They want to capture more market share. They want to have more customers than their competitors. Okay. So if a company has, let's say, 60% of a market and their competitor has 40%, then that company has has beaten their competition. Similarly, some companies don't care so much about how many customers they have. Rather, they try to maximize their revenues and profits. Okay. So for example, if you think about Microsoft versus Apple, okay, so clearly Microsoft wants to have as many customers as possible, okay, but if you think about Apple, they, you know, they have a smaller share of the market, but they could increase their market share if they lowered their prices, but they're not lowering their prices. Why not? Because they're not after more customers. They're after more revenue and profits. Okay? So companies can beat their competition in one of these two ways. Now the question is, can purchasing help a company do either of these? Again, going back to Michael Porter, he defines competitive advantage as follows. To gain competitive advantage over its rivals, a company must either, two options, either perform these activities at a lower cost, okay, or perform them in a way that leads to differentiation. Okay. So I'm just going to go back here. So there are two basic strategies for competitive advantage. The first one is low cost leadership. Okay, low cost leadership means your product, you are the you have low cost, but in fact you are the lowest cost because you are the leader. You're the company that has a given product at the lowest cost. So you sell the lowest priced product on the market. Obviously, everything else being equal, people prefer to buy the product at the lowest possible price. Okay? And you can offer the lowest possible price only if you have the lowest cost. Okay? If you don't have the lowest cost in the market, you cannot offer the lowest price. Now, a second way to gain competitive advantage is through differentiation. Okay. What is differentiation? Differentiation is basically uh, offering products for which customers are willing to pay extra. Okay. In the case of Microsoft versus Apple. Okay. Microsoft follows the low cost leadership strategy. So PCs are much cheaper than uh, Macs. So people buy PCs. More people buy PCs because they're lower cost, lower price. But uh, some people choose not to buy the lowest price product. They are willing to pay extra, and they're willing to pay more for an Apple product because Apple follows a differentiation strategy. In other words, Apple provides products and services for which people are willing to pay extra. Okay. Now the question is, let me ask you this: can purchasing help a company achieve low cost leadership? Of course it does. Because the raw material costs are a big component of a company's total costs. And as raw material costs decrease, a company's total cost decreases, and the company can offer lower prices and attract more customers. So purchasing can help a company achieve low cost leadership. How about differentiation? Can purchasing help a company pursue a differentiation strategy? The answer is yes, because uh, if you want, so for example, you will see this a lot. A lot of companies are now about fair trade, especially the coffee shops, etc. So their coffee may be more expensive, but because they are sourcing or purchasing their raw materials from certain regions of the world in certain ways, they differentiate their coffee and they charge a premium price for it. And this is possible through purchasing. So purchasing can also help a company pursue differentiation strategy. So now we can see that, whoops. Now we see that a company, now we see that purchasing can help a company achieve cost advantage as well as value advantage. So now we're at the point where we can define purchasing, procurement, and supply management. Okay? So People talk about purchasing, people talk about procurement, and supply management. And you will see that people treat these concepts differently. Okay, and as such, they have listed different activities under each concept. Okay, so the idea is there are these activities under purchasing, and then procurement is broader. Purchasing is included in procurement, plus there are other procurement activities. Similarly, supply management includes procurement, and there are also other supply management activities. Okay? To me, these are one and the same. To me, purchasing is the same as procurement, which is the same as supply management. Again, I'm not trying to debate or disprove anything. It's just that this is my personal opinion, but when you go out there, you will see a lot of people that differentiate between these. Okay? To me, the difference is more of a operational versus strategic focus. In other words, to me, the difference is more short term versus long term. Okay? So if you're talking about the focus, these activities are shorter term, more tactical and operational in nature, and these activities are more strategic and longer term. Okay, so let me briefly go over these activities and tell you what they mean. So, identification of purchasing needs, self-explanatory. Discussion with salespeople. Um, this is interesting, right? So you need you need something. You have a need, and you need to purchase a raw material. Why do you talk to salespeople? What do they have to do with raw materials? Well, they have a lot to do with raw materials because ultimately you purchase raw materials to satisfy customer requirements. And who best knows the customer requirements? Salespeople. So purchasing people consult with salespeople to understand what kind of raw materials would best satisfy customer needs and wants. And then identification of suppliers, which suppliers can provide this raw material, and then market studies. Okay, so market is the environment in which you deal with suppliers. It can be a monopoly, it can be an oligopoly, it could be a free market. So the market in which these suppliers operate determine how you will deal with those suppliers. Okay, so you need to know the context before you talk to the suppliers. Okay, analysis. Negotiations with suppliers, proposals, selection of suppliers, issuance of POs. PO stands for purchase order. Okay, there's contract administration. Um, Typically, um, when you sign a purchasing contract, it's longer term. Okay, it's not just one single purchasing transaction. Okay, so contracts are signed usually for longer term, maybe multiple months, multiple years, and that contract stays in effect. And so you need to manage and administer that contract. And then, of course, purchasing records. Why do you need these records? You need these records to evaluate the performance of suppliers. So, as you work with suppliers over multiple years, you need to keep track of how well these suppliers uh, work with you, basically. How well do they perform as suppliers? Okay. Now, in procurement, You have material specifications. In other words, what are the technical characteristics and attributes of the raw materials or services that you would like to buy? Okay, and then you need to do material studies and value analysis. The thing is, um, the technology has advanced so much that in many cases there are multiple raw materials that can uh, fulfill customer requirements. Okay, now you need to analyze which raw material is best for your company in satisfying customer requirements. Okay, from a customer perspective, all these materials can be equally acceptable, but then you need to select the best material for your company. And that's what is done in material studies, studying, analyzing different raw materials and determining which one provides the most value for your company. Market research, okay, purchasing activities, management of supplier quality. Okay, the idea here is that you're working with the suppliers over long term, over long periods of time, and you need to monitor the quality of raw materials they're providing you. In fact, when I'm talking about products, I'm also talking about services. So physical products have quality characteristics, services have quality characteristics. Suppliers can provide you physical products as well as service characteristics, and you need to monitor the quality of both products and services. Okay, and if there is uh, um, any deficiency in quality, any decreases in quality, your firm must intervene and work with suppliers to correct these quality issues. You have purchase of inbound transportation, obviously, and management of investment recovery. What is investment recovery? Investment recovery is basically sometimes companies have surplus materials. They purchase raw materials and then they realize later on, okay, we purchased more than we needed, a little bit less was enough. We have this extra material. How to sell off this extra surplus material. Or when you purchase something and it becomes obsolete, or it comes to the end of its economic life. Okay, so these kinds of things will be sold off, salvaged, scrapped. Okay, getting the most value out of your end of life items, surplus items, etc. Okay, purchasing is involved in the product design for very good reasons, and we're going to talk about this. And the reason is, as I said, when designing a product, the materials used are of utmost importance. The materials not only determine the cost to make a product, but they determine the appeal to the customer. Okay, so uh, raw materials used in a product are very important and they need to be considered in product design. And then you have supplier qualification and selection teams. Okay, supplier qualification means, will you work with just any supplier, or do you have standards a supplier must meet before they can provide raw materials for your company? For example, uh, can just anybody sell to Walmart? No, because Walmart has a supplier qualification program and you have to meet certain requirements before Walmart will even listen to you. Okay? And then you have partnerships and strategic alliances with suppliers. Okay? And this is important because in long-term relationships, uh, you need to work together with your suppliers to extract the most value out of a business relationship. Okay. Monitoring of supply environment, very important. We've talked about the supply chain evolution and all these new opportunities on the customer side, on the supplier side. Strategic materials acquisition plans. Again, this is longer term, so looking ahead, um, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road. Okay, are you going to use the same raw materials? Will you use different types of raw materials? Maybe your raw materials will be more energy efficient, maybe more sustainable, biodegradable, less toxic, etc. So, how are your raw materials changing over the long term? You need to have a plan for that. And then monitoring of continuous improvement. And so continuous improvement is a very interesting thing. We're going to talk a little bit about it later, but what happens is that companies are always trying to do better and better and better. And this applies to purchasing as well. Just because you have done a good job in purchasing today is not enough. You need to have a plan how to do even better tomorrow. That is called continuous improvement. So regardless of how well you perform today, you should also always be thinking how you can do even better tomorrow and the day after, etc. So we're going to talk about continuous improvement in purchasing, and of course, uh, corporate strategic planning. Okay, purchasing, sourcing, supply management are key ingredients in the strategic plan of a company. Why? Because they are key to differentiation strategy as well as to low cost leadership strategy. So as a result, purchasing has a has an important role to play in corporate strategy. So let's talk about the general characteristics of purchasing. Okay, again, as I said at the very beginning of this presentation, purchasing and sales are two sides of the same coin. There is just one physical transaction that is going on, but there's a buyer who looks from one perspective, there's a seller who looks from another perspective. Okay, so please keep in mind this duality when talking about purchasing. Okay, so now we're talking about inbound movement of products, physical goods. So products are uh, coming to the company, we are receiving the products, and the goal is to supply the firm with needed products. And this is a very general term. This includes services, raw materials, all kinds of products and services. Okay, not just physical goods. Uh, Purchasing manages supplier relationships. This is very important. Okay, we're going to talk about this a lot because just as a company manages their customer relationships, a company should manage its supplier relationships. Okay, and as we just talked about the long-term nature of purchasing, you need to establish business relationships and make sure that these relationships help your company achieve competitive advantage. And purchasing is also, an important characteristic of purchasing is it's very customer centric, customer focused, and seeks to fulfill customer needs and wants. So what does a firm purchase? A firm purchases a million things. Okay, obviously A firm purchases raw materials. A firm purchases production equipment. A firm purchases office equipment, consulting services, legal services, security services, all kinds of services, advertising services, marketing services. Uh, so, so the company spends money on these items, but are these an investment or an expense? So as you purchase products and services, are you making an investment or is that an expense? So for that, we need to know what is an investment and what is an expense. Okay. An investment is something that you expect a return on. Okay. An expense is something that you buy because you cannot do your work otherwise. So for example, the university has invested in this marker. Okay, is this marker an investment or an expense? Now, this marker is an expense. Why? Because the university had to buy this equipment, this marker, because without this marker, we cannot do our job. But we are not expecting a return on this marker. In contrast, if the university invests or buys stocks, okay, when the university buys stocks, that's an investment. Why? Because the university buys something on which they expect a return. Stocks are investments because they're bought in an expectation of a return. Stocks are not bought to make our work possible. Okay, so let's look at this, and as you can see, some of the items purchasing buys are investments. Some of the items are expenses. For example, so production equipment, expense or investment? It's an investment. Why? Because you will pay for this production equipment, and this production equipment will make products, and those products will earn you revenue, and you'll recover your investment, and you'll start making a profit. Okay, this is an investment. But let's suppose office equipment, let's say chairs. Okay, we need chairs to sit and do our business, do our work. Is that our chairs an investment or an expense? Clearly they're an expense. Why? Because you're not going to get any return from your chairs. How about advertising? Is advertising an expense or an investment? It's an investment because after you purchase advertising, you invest in advertising, and advertising increases your revenues, and that provides your return. So here's a list. This list is a bit more detailed. It's just there to give you some general idea. And the point of this slide is that it shows you how diverse purchasing requirements can be. So if you go into a purchasing career, you'll never have a dull day because you'll be purchasing from the cheapest things to the most expensive things, and it's a fascinating business function. Okay. Here are some other expenses: administrative expenses, facilities expenses, finance and HR. So all these departments different departments have their own purchasing requirements as well. It's not just raw materials that we buy for production. We buy many things for the administrative offices. For example, office equipment, furniture, postage, shipping services, uh, facilities, maintenance, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, okay, plumbing services, cleaning, security, all these things have to be purchased. Uh, Finance department has purchasing requirements. Uh, Human resources has purchasing requirements. Payroll processing, property insurance, outsourced collections, all these things have to be purchased for finance and human resources. So the point is, every department has some purchasing need, and that is why purchasing supports all value added activities. Let me go back. Okay, so purchasing supports logistics, operations, purchasing supports marketing, purchasing supports services, purchasing supports technology, purchasing supports human resources, purchasing supports firm infrastructure. So basically, purchasing works with every other department in a firm, and this is unavoidable. Yes, so sales and marketing needs promotional items, printing, market research services, information technology has all these purchasing needs. Okay, so as a purchasing professional, you will be very familiar with all the departments in your company. You will be very connected to many many parts of the company, and it's a very interesting job. So so let's think a little bit more about the importance of purchasing. Why is purchasing important? We already stated some reasons for that. But let's try to come up with a comprehensive list. First of all, purchasing is key to profitability. Obviously, what you purchase adds up to your costs, and that reduces your profits. But as you reduce your costs through better purchasing decisions, your profits increase. So purchasing is key to profitability. It's also the basis of product quality. Okay, garbage in, garbage out. You cannot begin with bad raw materials and make a good product. Okay, low quality inputs produce low quality products. So if you want high quality finished goods, you need to purchase high quality materials to begin with. So purchasing is very important in quality assurance. Another uh, thing about purchasing is by its very nature, purchasing department will be very familiar with the supplier network. So they'll keep an eye on what's going on in the supply network and how certain opportunities can be leveraged and how certain threats can be avoided or minimized. Okay, so it can provide competitive advantage. We've talked about it. We've talked about how purchasing helps the company achieve low cost leadership and differentiation. Purchasing improves customer satisfaction, obviously, because when you use sustainable raw materials, when you use fair trade, when you use healthier raw materials, it helps customers feel better about themselves. Okay, so customer satisfaction goes up, revenues and profits go up as well. And purchasing impacts a firm's image and social reputation. And the opposite is also true. Poor purchasing decisions can destroy a company's image and reputation. And from time to time, we hear about these sweatshop conditions in developing countries. So, purchasing should look at the entire supply network to see that there are no threats that uh, can jeopardize a company's image and reputation. Um, so, so let's talk a little bit more about profits. We said purchasing affects costs, and obviously that affects profits. How about revenues? Can purchasing affect revenues? Yes. Uh, but the difference is purchasing affects costs directly, purchasing affects revenues indirectly. Okay? So purchasing has a direct impact on costs, but an indirect impact on revenues. Okay? And another distinction I want to make is which one is more important? So uh, companies want to maximize their profits, so they need to increase revenues and decrease sales, decrease costs. Which one is more important in a company? In my humble opinion, and in my professional experience, revenue, cash is the king. So if you want to advance more quickly in your career, if you want to be promoted faster in your career, align yourself with sales. It doesn't matter what you do in a company. You could be in purchasing, but as long as you show that you increase your revenues, your chances of promotion are much greater. People will admire you for reducing costs, but they will love you for increasing revenues. Revenues are more important in a company than costs. So this is my career advice to you. Focus on revenues first and then costs secondly. And you may be wondering, why are revenues more important than costs? Three reasons. First, um, there is a lower limit on how much you can reduce costs, but there is no upper limit on how much you can increase revenues. No matter how high your revenues, you can still, theoretically, there's no upper limit on how much revenue you can generate. But the costs, there's a bottom, like there's a lower limit. The second reason is when you sell more products, okay, your revenues increase and the unit cost will decrease. So as you increase your sales, because of economies of scale, the unit costs will decrease naturally by themselves without you doing anything different, because the fixed costs will be distributed over a greater number of finished goods. So as a result, the costs will decrease as revenues will increase. That's the second reason why revenues are more important. Because the other way doesn't occur. As you decrease costs, your revenues, there's no direct link there. The third reason, and in my opinion, the most important reason for why revenues are more important than costs, is that revenue increases excuse all managerial mistakes. You could be the worst manager ever, okay? You could be the boss that everybody dreads, everybody hates. But you can keep your job as long as you increase the revenues. You can make all managerial mistakes and all will be forgiven if you increase the revenues. My case in point is Steve Jobs. As you know, everybody loves Steve Jobs, right? But what kind of a manager was he? He was a jerk. Apple employees were afraid of getting into the elevator with Steve Jobs because he was known to fire people on the spot. He was worse than Donald Trump. But people loved him. Why? Because he increased the revenues. He made Apple sell its products. Okay. So anyway, this is my little career digression here. Revenues are more important, and even if you're in purchasing, align yourself with revenues. Okay. So so how does purchasing increase revenues, and how does it reduce costs? Okay, here's a list. First of all, purchasing can good purchasing decisions can lower costs by reducing your acquisition costs. Then, good purchasing decisions can reduce the processing costs, the startup costs, etc. And good purchasing can reduce your quality costs. Okay? And if your quality is high, your downtime, your disruption risk is also low. So the cost of shutdowns are reduced through better purchasing. Your risks of breakdowns um, and occupational hazards are reduced through better purchasing decisions, and the entire supply chain cost comes down. Now, purchasing can also increase sales by making products available to the market faster. Okay, so when you receive a customer order, you want to start production as soon as possible. And that will not be possible if you don't have raw materials ready. So purchasing makes sure that you have the raw materials ready so that you can start production as soon as possible you receive an order. Okay, this is called make to order. Okay, so some companies um, employ this strategy, make to order. Okay, so for example, Dell Computers uh, doesn't make a computer before they receive an order. They wait. When they receive an order, they start production. But they need to have raw materials ready to start the production. Otherwise, they'll have to wait for the raw materials. So the goal is reduce time to market, increase market responsiveness by having raw materials ready. Improved quality, obviously if you purchase better quality raw materials, you will have better quality finished products, and that will increase your sales. Again, if you want pricing flexibility with your customers, you need to contain raw material costs. When you contain raw material costs, you will have a greater margin, which will give you greater pricing flexibility. And obviously, innovation. These days, it's bread and butter of business, and a lot of innovation comes from your supply network, and your purchasing department can relay this information to your organization. So, um, how important are sales costs? How important are purchasing costs? Here's a very, very general breakdown. Okay, on average, this says 53% of costs a company incurs are um, raw material costs. What does that mean? That means that if a company wants to reduce costs, it should start here. Okay. Now you could start let's say by reducing equipment costs. You can start doing that, but that's not going to give you a lot of cost reduction. So if you want to get the biggest cost reduction effect, this is the biggest cost reduction uh, potential right here. Okay, so this is more than half of the costs, raw material costs, and you have the greatest cost reduction potential here. Now, in this slide, you have different industries, okay, and they have looked at industry averages, and they have calculated the percentage of raw material costs in each industry, okay, and this is an interesting ranking. In some industries, the purchasing costs can be as high as 60% or up to 80%. So for these companies, purchasing is critical for profitability and competitive advantage. Okay. In other companies, purchasing costs are about half, but in other businesses, in other industries, purchasing costs can be as low as 30% or even 20%. So in those industries, purchasing is not that important. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because as you pursue a career in purchasing, you would be better off in looking for employment in industries where purchasing is more important. So how can a company use purchasing for competitive advantage? Here's an example, Walmart, okay? So what is the strategy of Walmart? They pursue a low-cost leadership strategy. So they can sell their products at the lowest price. How can they sell their products at the lowest price? Well, they can sell their products at the lowest price because they have the lowest cost. So their purchasing department does a better job than their competitors' purchasing departments, and Walmart achieves the lower costs than compared to its competitors.